Hi, this is John with Black Flag Armory, and today I want to take a little bit of time to talk about picking out your first handgun. Now, when we're new to shooting or we're picking a handgun for the first time, we tend to rely on information from somebody we already know. Sometimes that's excellent. A lot of us have really great friends who are really into shooting, who really know their stuff. Sometimes we may not have a good source of information. And there's a lot of opinions out there. There's a lot of information. Hopefully this can give you a little bit of a feel for how to make that selection. One of the first considerations that I think we need to think about is the use of the firearm. Is this a gun that we're intending to use for home defense, for competition shooting, for just target shooting, plinking, and having fun with friends? Is this a firearm that we're considering carrying on our body in a vehicle or concealed carry for personal protection? That's gonna dictate a little bit what size handgun we wanna choose, what calibers we do and don't wanna carry with us potentially, and some of the weight and form factors, or even how common the firearm is for things like holster availability. So let's assume we're going to use a gun at home for home defense. It's not something we're going to carry with us. So usually there for new shooters, we're talking defensive applications. I tend to steer people towards things that are high round count, so a high capacity, low recoil, and larger frames. Now, when I say a larger frame, I don't mean something that doesn't fit your hand or is too big or too bulky to carry. What I mean is something that's not tiny or subcompact, right? So things like this tiny little North American Arms revolver, right? The little Black Widow here, or something like a Glock 43X MOS are small, compact guns, right? Now, the reason I wouldn't necessarily recommend those for something like home defense applications is that a larger handgun, right? So like this Archon Type B, or here I have the CZ Accu Shadow, which is a much larger handgun. These tend to be heavier, higher capacity, and kind of what you get from that is also lower recoil if we're talking the same calibers. And speaking of caliber, I tend to steer people towards 9mm as the first firearm when we're talking defensive applications. It's an effective round, you get a high capacity, and it's pretty low recoil. It's a very manageable round. So in a home defense gun, I generally say full-size 9mm handguns are a great place to start. So if we narrow that down into a full-size 9mm handgun, then the question is, what brand, operation, how big, how heavy, and some of the other considerations, right? I think something that is extremely important is how the gun fits in your hand. So take this CZ for example. Can I comfortably manipulate this handgun and operate the controls without shifting my hand around too much, right? So what that means is, can I do things like manipulate the magazine release? Can I manipulate the safety on this firearm, right? Can I physically reach that safety? Can I rack the slide on the firearm, right? So part of manipulating that and being able to clear malfunctions and just safe operation is whether or not I can operate the slide. Is the spring too heavy, too light? Can I not grip the slide well enough? That sort of thing, right? Can I reach the trigger comfortably on this gun? We're gonna find that there are lots and lots of shapes and sizes of firearms, and we have lots and lots of variations in our own hands, in our own capabilities, upper body strength, arm strength, hand strength. And so what fits me comfortably might not be the same thing that fits you comfortably. So that's the next factor that I would take into consideration is, can I reach the controls? Can I operate this gun comfortably, right? And the last thing I would talk about to someone who's brand new would be price range, any kind of brand preference. If you really want to carry something from Glock or from Springfield or from CZ, right, that would narrow down some of the firearms that you're looking at. And then availability of accessories. So if it's something that you're gonna put a light on, right? Does that firearm have a rail or accept a light that you like? Or what about holster availability? Now, if this is a firearm that you're using for home defense, holster availability isn't as big of a concern, but you do need to be able to store that firearm safely, whether that's in a lockbox, a safe, or some other device when it's not under your direct control. So to sum up some of the benefits of a full-size 9mm handgun for something like home defense that's not going to be carried with you, right, is you have a high capacity, low recoil. It's something that fits comfortably in your hand. You can manipulate and operate that safely and comfortably. And it's something that fits your price range and preferences and feels good to you. That's going to be a really comfortable gun to get out there and train with, especially for something like home defense. When under a stressful situation, you might need to grab that and use it proficiently. So now I'll step away from that and talk a little bit more about firearms for carry use. So say you've decided you want to get into concealed carry, you want to open carry. If you want to have a firearm on your person for personal protection, there are some other considerations. I still think 9mm is a great caliber for a lot of people, especially new to shooting. I personally carry 9mm handguns. Most of the people in our shop do. It's a great round. It's very common. It's not too expensive. And you get high capacity with low recoil. Now, when you're carrying on your body or even off body, especially with concealed carry, having a smaller framed handgun works better for most people. Now that's because a smaller framed handgun, right, like this 43X versus this CZ Shadow, it's pretty obvious, right, that one of these is going to be easier to conceal on my body than the other, right? So that's the big advantage of these smaller handguns, slim frames, is that they are compact, they're easy to carry, and they're easy to conceal. The trade-off here is normally you have reduced capacity, right? My full-size CZ carries, 18 rounds, 21 rounds, 24 rounds, depending on my magazines, whereas the 43X frame carries 10, which is a huge improvement from where we were maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but it's still a reduced capacity. What I get for that reduced capacity is greater concealability. The other trade-off is the smaller the frame is on a firearm, the more felt recoil there is, right? Because there's less weight overall to suck up the recoil impulse of that firearm. So typically, smaller guns are harder to be more accurate with. That's not a huge concern for a lot of concealed carry applications because we're dealing with a little bit of trade-off here. Concealability versus, top level accuracy or, overall accuracy with that firearm. Of course, your training and practice plays a huge role in that, and we think you should train constantly, but you typically have a little snappier, a little more felt recoil out of a smaller framed handgun. So if we're selecting a handgun for concealed carry, something that you can carry on your body comfortably is huge. If the gun is not comfortable, it's probably not something you're going to carry. And that brings us pretty deep into holster availability. Thinking about a firearm that's common enough to have a lot of holster options might be a good choice for you, because chances are, if you're anything like me or most of us for that matter, you're going to go through a lot of concealed holster options before you find what fits comfortably and what works well for you. One of the last things I want to mention is semi-automatic firearms versus revolvers, right? Now, for a long time, we've recommended as a whole, right? The industry for a long time has said, okay, revolvers are simple, they're easy to use, they're great guns for first-time shooters. Now, a lot of that's true, but some of the trade-offs you get with most revolvers are long, heavy trigger pulls, reduced capacity. You typically have between 5 and 8 shots, 6 shots being the most common. And you have a much harder time reloading them quickly and under stress. So with something like a semi-automatic or striker-fired handgun, all I have to do is release that magazine, get a new one in there, and then send the slide forward when I need to reload. Whereas if I'm dealing with something like a revolver, or especially like this little NAA Black Widow, I have to swing out the cylinder, eject the spent casings, and then individually feed casings in, or use something like a speed strip or a speed loader to load 2, 5, 6 at a time into the cylinder, close that, and then re-engage. So loading a revolver or reloading a revolver is much more difficult than its semi-automatic counterparts. Now, I'm not saying that you're gonna be in sustained firefights, especially when you're going to the grocery store, and you're gonna need to be very concerned with reloads. But if your firearm malfunctions, if you fire up all your rounds, those are real considerations. So something else to consider, right, is the overall capacity of the firearm you're carrying and how much ammo you are or are not carrying with you. I hope that was helpful. This is a real broad overview, so if you have questions, please feel free to engage us in the comments. We do our best to get back to you. But when you go in to select your first firearm or your 30th firearm, hopefully this gives you a little bit to think about as far as your specific application for that gun and what you really hope to accomplish.